Before we dive into the hidden pages of religious history, I want you to picture a moment that you may have never really stopped to feel. Imagine you are walking on a dark road with only a few scattered streetlights and a chill that slips through every layer of your clothing. Suddenly, in that darkness, something looks at you with expressive eyes, a creature that feels both familiar and strange, both close and deeply misunderstood for centuries. And the most shocking part is this: that very creature has become the center of one of the most widespread misunderstandings in the Muslim community. A misunderstanding that has made generations tremble, avoid, and even feel disgust toward a being to whom Allah has given loyalty, protective instinct, and a heart that can love. This is not an ordinary story. This is something that touches the deepest place of faith. It is a question that challenges even the things that we think we have known clearly since childhood. For years, we have heard vague warnings, hand-me-down sayings with no clear source, and even harsh judgments that turn the image of a dog, an animal that only knows how to be loyal and protective, into a symbol of impurity. But how many people have actually paused for a moment to ask, is this really what Islam teaches us? This is where the secret begins to open. When you touch the truth, you will see there are things that, if you had known earlier, you would never look at a dog with the same cautious gaze again. You would not let fear replace knowledge, and you would not let culture lead you far away from the teachings of the religion. What you are about to hear may surprise you and may even move you, because we are not only talking about dogs, we are speaking about something much bigger. The way we understand our religion, our sense of mercy, and the concept of purity that Islam always emphasizes. Welcome to Prophetic History Explained, where forgotten stories are brought back to life with truth, depth, and a balanced perspective. But before we continue, I want you to prepare yourself, because from this moment on, you will face not only information, but also the very beliefs that have been rooted deep in your subconscious. The truth is this: in many Muslim communities, dogs are not only avoided, they are seen as a threat to purity. There are people who have never read a single religious proof, yet still believe that simply touching a dog is enough to affect their prayers. Others fear that having a dog in the house will make the angels turn away. But if you ask where those ideas came from, most people will just shake their heads and say, "That is what people say." This is exactly the tragedy of misunderstanding. When vague stories are repeated for long enough, they turn into beliefs. And when belief is not built on knowledge, it produces extremism, fear, and prejudice. That has never been the goal of Islam. Islam never teaches believers to live in blind fear, and it certainly does not teach them to avoid Allah's creatures just because of unverified rumors. Islam is a religion of light, the light of balance, understanding, and compassion. If we look deeper, we will see something very clear. Islam always calls for moderation. Purity is mandatory, but so is mercy. Keeping places of worship clean and avoiding impurity is a serious requirement. But loving creation, not harming, not hating, that is also a sacred command. When these two are placed side by side, they are not in conflict, they complement each other. And it is exactly at this intersection that the misunderstandings about dogs need to be undone. Because if you look at the way many Muslims treat dogs today, you will see that most of them are not acting based on religious teachings, but based on fear. A fear that has been fed through generations, but does not stand strong when placed in front of evidence. And when fear becomes bigger than truth, it can push us away from the spirit that Islam tries to build, the spirit of compassion. At this point, you may be asking, so what exactly does Islam say about dogs? This is the journey we are about to explore together. And to see the truth clearly, we have to start from the most absolute source, the Quran. That is where Allah tells us a story that, if understood correctly, can shatter deep-rooted prejudice in the community and replace it with respect for this loyal creature. Before we open that door, if you feel that these are things worth continuing to discover with me, take a second to subscribe to Prophetic History Explained. Your support is the motivation that allows me to keep bringing you more honest and profound perspectives. Let us continue this journey of enlightenment together. If you have ever believed that the Quran is completely silent about dogs, that there is no place in the words of Revelation where Allah mentions this often overlooked creature, then you are about to witness one of the most powerful reality-shifting truths. Because right at the center of one of the most symbolic stories of the Quran, the story of the brave young men in Surah Al-Kahf, Allah places the image of a dog in a position that no one can ignore, as long as they are willing to look with open eyes. The story begins with an escape. Young men, carrying in their hearts faith in the Creator, stand up against tyranny and idolatry. They leave their families, their city, and their safety behind to protect something more precious than life itself, their faith. And when they find a small cave in the middle of desolate hills, they think they are just looking for a hiding place. But Allah turns that cave into the stage for a miracle that has amazed millions of people for more than 1,000 years. What most people do not notice is this: they did not arrive there alone. The Quran describes that, at the entrance of the cave, stretching its legs calmly, there was a dog. It is not portrayed as a symbol of impurity, nor as something excluded from sacredness, but as a guard placed exactly where it belongs. That image, which seems so simple, holds a layer of meaning that, if understood correctly, is enough to tear down many of the human-made biases about dogs. Allah does not mention the dog just once. He describes it multiple times in the same passage, almost as if he wants to carve its presence into that sacred picture. Think about this. The Quran is a perfect book, with not a single extra or missing word. Would it mention a trivial detail? Would it place the image of a dog side by side with young men whom Allah Himself is protecting, if that creature were inherently filthy or something that must be shunned? The astonishing thing is this: the dog is not just tagging along with them. It is woven into the story as part of the group that is under divine protection. Allah describes how He turns them to the right and to the left, preserving their sleep that lasts for hundreds of years. And throughout that entire time, the dog remains at the mouth of the cave, silent yet steadfast, as a sign that Allah's protection does not exclude any creature that is attached to goodness. Many scholars say that the appearance of the dog is a subtle honoring of loyalty, a quality that Allah loves. Those young men showed loyalty to their faith, and the dog showed loyalty to its companions. Those two forms of loyalty stand next to each other not by coincidence. They complete each other, highlight each other, and are preserved by Allah as a timeless lesson. If you read carefully, you will see that the Quran does not mention impurity or danger in relation to dogs. On the contrary, the story is almost saying that when a creature is tied to goodness, it becomes part of the blessing. It is not belittled. It is not excluded. It is not treated as something that must be avoided. This is the point that shocks many people when they first truly pay attention to this story, because it goes completely against what they have heard from word of mouth. The dog in Surah Al-Kahf does not diminish the sacredness of the miracle. It does not drive angels away. It does not take away the purity of the cave. Instead, it is kept in the Quranic narrative as part of that sacred scene, as a key to unlock the truth that Islam does not treat dogs as contemptible. And when you look at the context of the story, young people leaving their city for faith, seeking refuge in a lonely cave, then being protected by Allah in a sleep that lasts through centuries, you will see that the presence of the dog becomes a deeply human touch. In the middle of fear, loneliness, and danger, Allah reminds us that sometimes protection comes from where you least expect it, from a loyal creature, one that has no voice, yet constantly watches over you with a protective instinct that Allah Himself placed in its heart. This also opens up a larger question. If the Quran wants us to see that the dog is placed in the story in an honorable way, are we really judging this animal according to the spirit that Allah intends? Or are we looking at it through a lens distorted by culture and baseless fear? In the silence of that cave, the image of the dog lying at the entrance is like a gate between the world of miracles and the everyday world. It does not speak, but its very presence is enough to change how we see a creature that society often underestimates. Through this story, the Quran is almost saying that the value of a creature does not lie in its appearance, but in its loyalty, its qualities, and the role that Allah gave it. And maybe, if we are willing to look at that story with open hearts, we will realize that the truth about dogs in Islam is nothing like what rumors have made us believe for so many years. When we move from the Quran to the vivid records of the life of Prophet Muhammad, we no longer see a story inside a cave. Instead, we see real life itself. We see people working, hunting, guarding their homes, protecting their herds, and beside them, sometimes quietly and sometimes prominently, are dogs that play an essential role in a growing society. And the deeply surprising thing for anyone who only knows Islam through vague hearsay is this: the Prophet did not chase them away, did not fear them, and certainly did not teach Muslims to avoid them as something impure. Instead, he saw them for what they truly are, useful beings with a role and a clear place in life. One of the strongest proofs of this is the way the Prophet allowed the use of trained hunting dogs. When a trained dog chases prey, catches it, and holds it for its owner, the Prophet clearly said that the meat is halal, that Muslims may eat it without any worry. From a legal point of view, this is not a casual permission. It is a confirmation that the contact between the prey, which is going to be on your plate, and the dog does not remove its lawfulness. If the body of the dog were completely impure, if every contact made food haram, then that statement would not exist. This shows that Islam never views dogs through an extreme lens. On the contrary, it places them within the real context of life. When properly trained and used for a good purpose, a dog becomes a tool that helps humans survive and follow halal guidelines. This is how the Prophet taught his followers to look at everything with reason, with consideration of purpose and real life, not with emotion and prejudice. Dogs did not only appear in hunting, they also appeared in the role of guardians, a role that the Prophet also affirmed as legitimate. People who herd livestock, families living in remote areas, and farmers protecting their crops, all of them can keep dogs. And the Prophet said that keeping a dog for such valid reasons does not reduce the reward of its owner. Many people like to quote the statement about reward being reduced, but they forget the crucial detail. That only applies when someone keeps a dog without any purpose. In other words, the problem is not the dog. The problem is irresponsible and pointless ownership. In its approach, Islam always distinguishes between legitimate need and useless excess. When a dog protects your family from thieves, guards your animals from predators, or protects your crops from harm, it becomes part of the greater good, a value that Islam always honors. Islam does not view dogs as barriers that drive angels away, the way many rumors say. Islam only asks Muslims to live with discipline, to keep places of worship pure, and not to let carelessness weaken the respect owed to Allah. However, beyond practical work, Islam raises dogs to a moral height through stories that shake the human heart. The most famous is the story of the sinful woman, a woman whom society would probably despise, but whose entire sins were forgiven by Allah because she stopped to give water to a thirsty dog. One small act, one moment of choosing compassion over indifference, became the reason for Allah to open the gates of paradise for her. That story is not just a cute illustration about kindness, it is a wake-up call. It tells us that the value of an action does not lie in the creature that receives it or the people who see it, but in the level of sincerity that the heart of the doer pours into it. That thirsty dog could not say thank you and could not repay. But Allah saw, Allah knew, and Allah recorded it. And that was enough to transform an anonymous act into a miraculous salvation. In contrast, there is the story of the woman who locked up a cat until it died. One cruel action, one long-lasting negligence, became the reason she faced severe punishment on the Day of Judgment. If compassion toward a dog can earn Allah's forgiveness, then cruelty toward a cat can drag a person into punishment. The message of Islam is very clear. Mercy is a command, not an option. Cruelty is a sin, not an accident. When we look at all the hadith related to dogs, what appears is not the image of a despised animal. It is the image of a creature that has the right to live, to be respected, to be used when there is a proper purpose, and to be cared for when it is weak. Islam does not place dogs in opposition to purity. Islam simply teaches us how to live in balance, to avoid their saliva when we need to keep things clean, but not to hate or reject them from our lives. Once we understand this spirit, we see clearly that hadith does not throw dogs out of the Muslim community. Instead, hadith gives them a humane, reasonable, and ethical position. One that even modern societies sometimes fail to give them. For centuries, Islamic scholars have debated, analyzed, and tried to build a balanced understanding of the place of dogs within religious life. And the beautiful thing is this: the deeper you read, the clearer it becomes that the differences are not about whether dogs are terrifying or impure, but about the level of discipline and cleanliness that humans need to maintain. When you step into the world of Fiqh, Islamic jurisprudence, you will see that the common misunderstandings that float around daily life hardly have roots in the scholarly tradition. The Maliki school, known for its realistic perspective that reflects the everyday life of North African communities, affirms that the body of the dog is not impure. Surprisingly, they emphasize that impurity does not lie in the very essence of the animal, but only concerns its saliva when it comes into contact with utensils used for eating and drinking. The Hanafi school, with its highly structured thinking, also does not label dogs as inherently filthy creatures. They see the dog as something that needs careful hygienic handling when a person is preparing to perform worship. These two major schools, with different methods, reach the same conclusion. Dogs are not absolute sources of impurity. What Islam demands is awareness, not fear. Once we grasp this, we begin to understand why in many modern Muslim societies, dogs are not only accepted, but respected as an indispensable part of life. If you go to Turkey, you will see dogs with tags, cared for by local communities as neighborhood companions. In Indonesia, thousands of farming families rely on dogs to protect their herds and keep their children safe. In Jordan and Malaysia, working dogs serve as critical protection for police at airports, borders, and residential areas. What creates harmony between faith and reality is not extremism, it is maturity in applying religious teachings. Islam always teaches people to seek benefit and to prevent harm. Anything that brings benefit to society is worthy of appreciation. Dogs, with their powerful protective instinct, incredible sense of smell, and rare loyalty, play a crucial role in protecting human life. A rescue dog can locate a person trapped under rubble after an earthquake. A detection dog can find explosives and prevent disaster. A guide dog can become the eyes and hope of a blind person. These roles not only make life safer, they align beautifully with Islam's emphasis on benefit and goodness. And amid all these contributions, Muslims still fully preserve the spirit of purity through simple principles. Avoid a dog's saliva when preparing for prayer, wash when necessary, and set aside a clean space for worship. That is not a sign of hatred. It is a sign of respect for Allah and an orderly way of placing everything in its proper place. Just as Muslims do not wear muddy shoes into the mosque and do not pray in filthy areas, keeping a hygienic distance from dogs is simply part of a disciplined lifestyle, not a ban. Sadly, these beautiful truths are rarely mentioned in the community. Instead, most people only hear short phrases like, "Dogs are impure," or "Dogs drive angels away," and then unconsciously believe that Islam absolutely forbids them. These shortened statements not only distort the message of the religion, they also create a harsh attitude that is far from the compassion that Prophet Muhammad always emphasized. When a religious idea is separated from its purpose and wisdom, it is no longer light. It becomes darkness. What needs to be repeated more often in the Muslim community is this: Islam never considers dogs as creatures excluded from mercy. Islam only sets principles so that people can live more cleanly, more responsibly, and not turn pet ownership into carelessness. When scholars talk about a dog's saliva, they are not trying to spread fear. They are trying to keep purity in worship. When they allow the use of dogs for hunting, guarding, and protection, they are not only making legal rulings, they are showing a deep understanding of real life. And when they emphasize compassion for animals, they are preserving the spirit that the Prophet lived by, the spirit of mercy. Today, many Muslims have started keeping dogs as companions, not only as guards, but as friends. They bathe their dogs, limit the areas where the dogs roam, keep their homes clean, and still uphold purity for worship. This change does not contradict the religion. On the contrary, it shows a mature way of understanding the teachings. We can love a creature that Allah created and still preserve our rituals for Allah. The most beautiful part of all this is that when we learn to balance these things, we begin to live Islam more correctly. We are no longer led by fear, but guided by understanding. And at that point, the dog is no longer a symbol of impurity. It becomes a sign of the wisdom of the religion, a religion that appreciates benefit, exalts compassion, and teaches people to live responsibly in every situation. When we reach the end of this journey, what appears is not a rigid command or a forced conclusion. It is a quiet truth that touches the core of the heart. Islam has never asked us to choose between purity and mercy. On the contrary, this religion always teaches us to hold both, like two sides of a scale. If one side is missing, the entire moral system of a human being will tilt. And right at that meeting point, the story of dogs becomes a mirror that reflects how we truly understand our faith. Many Muslims have lived too long with fear. They fear losing purity, fear that angels will not enter their homes, and fear things that previous generations have repeated without realizing that those fears were never the soul of the teachings. Islam was never built on blind terror. Islam is built on wisdom, on a solid foundation of reason, compassion, and responsibility. When Allah created all living things, He did not create anything useless. Every creature has a role, a value, and a reason to exist. And dogs, with their loyalty, courage, and natural protective instinct, are part of that circle of divine wisdom. Therefore, when we understand correctly, we no longer see dogs as creatures expelled from sacredness. We see them as part of a subtle test. Can we maintain purity for worship and still keep mercy in our hearts? Can we live with discipline without losing kindness? Can we understand that what Allah forbids is never meant to shrink our lives, but to make them clearer and cleaner. Purity in Islam exists to protect the connection between humans and Allah, not to cut humans off from other creatures. And mercy in Islam exists to remind people that the greatness of a believer does not lie in the length of their prayers, but in their ability to bend down and lift up weak creatures, whether it is a cat, a bird, or a thirsty dog on the side of the road. Once these two values are placed side by side, we start to see the delicate beauty of Islam, beauty that we sometimes lose when we only hear one part and ignore the rest. Islam does not ask us to avoid dogs. Islam asks us to be responsible for their presence. You can live with a dog, work with a dog, care for it when it is sick, and protect it from hunger or abuse, as long as you maintain the necessary hygienic boundaries for worship. A clean prayer mat, a pure space for devotion, and washed hands before standing before Allah. That is discipline. And the way you stop on the road to rescue a stray dog, feed it, give it water, or protect it from violence, that is compassion. Both are signs of a heart that Allah loves. When we understand this, we unlock a deep corner of Islam. At that point, the religion is no longer just lines of strict text. It becomes a living system that guides people through the world without losing their inner clarity. And then, statements like, "Dogs are impure," "Dogs must not be kept," or "Dogs drive angels away," become incomplete fragments, no longer strong enough to define our spiritual life. They become distant echoes of culture, not the voice of the religion itself. What Islam wants from Muslims is not a cold attitude toward creation, but maturity. Islam wants us to distinguish between what must be preserved and what must be loved. Preserving purity is not a reason to close the heart, and mercy is never a reason to abandon religious discipline. When we balance both, we reach a state that not everyone achieves, the state of someone who truly understands the religion, not just belongs to it in name. And that is the final message from the story of dogs in Islam. It is not a story about an animal. It is a story about us, about the way we misunderstand simple matters, about the way we let fear cover the truth, and about the way we can return to the pure spirit that Islam set from the beginning. A spirit that is pure yet compassionate, disciplined yet gentle, strong yet able to bow down before the suffering of other creatures. When you understand this, you will not only see dogs differently, you will see your religion differently, with more light, more love, and more truth. The deepest lesson that we can draw is the harmony between two things that seem to be in conflict: discipline and compassion. Discipline keeps our faith from shaking. Compassion keeps our hearts from turning to stone. A mature Muslim is not someone who avoids all creatures out of fear of impurity. A mature Muslim is someone who knows how to live with boundaries, with cleanliness, and with a caring heart. When we truly understand this, we will no longer judge based on appearances, but based on purpose, reality, and ethics, exactly in the spirit that Prophet Muhammad left for us. Applied to our lives today, this means the following: keep your places of prayer clean. Wash your hands before worship. Create a pure space to connect with Allah. But at the same time, open your heart to living beings, especially the dogs that have been misunderstood for far too long. If you see an abandoned dog, help it instead of chasing it away. If you witness someone abusing an animal, speak up. And if you have the means to care for a dog that serves a protective or helpful purpose, do so with responsibility. It is these small actions that reflect the goodness that Islam wants from every believer. If you want to continue exploring deep, honest, and balanced perspectives on religion, join the Prophetic History Explained community to receive more beneficial knowledge about Quranic stories, the lives of the prophets, and and the spiritual lessons that modern society is slowly forgetting. Do not forget to subscribe to support our effort to create more meaningful videos in this journey of reviving the truth and light of Islam.